Good evening. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. After 28 years in the skies, I thought I'd seen every kind of passenger. I was wrong. Tonight's story is about a man who didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, and simply walked to the back of the plane while an entire cabin watched in silence. It stayed with me since the day I heard it. This is the story of Flight 2249. Elijah Cross walked through the jet bridge at Denver International with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a boarding pass folded into the pocket of a plain gray sweater. He moved the way men move when they've slept badly and decided not to mention it. Shoes clean but old, jacket draped over one forearm, the specific tired stillness of someone returning from something heavy rather than heading towards something light. He'd buried his wife 3 years earlier, in a spring that still occasionally arrived unannounced in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, and today happened to be one of those days he hadn't planned for it, the anniversary sitting quietly in the back of his mind, the whole drive to the airport. He found seat 2A without asking for help, slid his bag beneath the row ahead, and rested his head against the window. The leather was cold beneath his cheek. The cabin smelled like fresh coffee and something floral Airlines bought in bulk. He had a meeting in Atlanta in 4 hours and no intention of being late. And beneath that, quieter, he had a company of 11,000 employees who depended on decisions he made in rooms most of them would never enter, though nothing in his sweater or his posture suggested any of that. First class filled in slowly around him, a silver-haired man in a tailored suit settling into 3A with a newspaper, a couple in their 60s speaking in the clipped half-sentences of a long marriage, a younger executive moving past with his laptop bag held like a weapon. Each of them glanced at Elijah half a second longer than they glanced at anyone else, then looked away. Nobody said anything. In first class, silence was the second language everyone spoke fluently, the specific silence of people who had learned not to ask questions that might implicate their own comfort. Renata Voss came down the aisle with a tray of pre-departure drinks. 11 years on this route had taught her the regulars by their ties, their watches, the particular way they ordered sparkling water. She offered champagne to the silver-haired man, orange juice to the couple. When she reached row 2, she stopped. She looked at Elijah's sweater. She looked at his canvas bag. She didn't offer him anything. "Sir," she said, her voice polite the way a closed door is polite. "May I see your boarding pass?" Elijah opened his eyes, reached into his pocket, and handed it over without a word. She looked at it, then at him, then at it again, as though the letters might rearrange themselves into a different answer. "I'm going to need you to step out of your seat for a moment," Renata said. "We have to verify a few things." "The pass is valid," Elijah said, his voice low and even. "You can scan it." "I'm aware of how it works, sir. Please come with me to the front galley." He followed her to the galley. She didn't scan the pass. She didn't open her tablet. She held the paper between 2 fingers, the way a person holds something they already intend to throw away. "Sir, I'll be honest with you," Renata said. "We occasionally have passengers try to move up from economy once boarding begins. It happens more often than you'd think. You haven't scanned it. I'd like you to return to your assigned seat in the rear of the aircraft while we sort this out." 2A is my assigned seat. Her smile tightened at the corners. She reached for the intercom, and a moment later the lead flight attendant, Trevor Lang, arrived. Tall, tight-mouthed, a laminated badge he touched too often. He glanced at Elijah and made up his mind in that glance, the same half-second Renata had used, for the same unexamined reasons. "Is there a problem?" Trevor said. It wasn't a question. "This gentleman is refusing to relocate," Renata said. "I'm not refusing anything," Elijah said. "I'm asking you to scan my boarding pass." Trevor took the paper. He didn't scan it either. "Sir, for the comfort and safety of the other passengers, I'm going to ask you one more time to move to an available seat in the main cabin. We can straighten this out after departure." "After departure," Elijah repeated slowly, as if tasting the phrase. "You want me to give up my seat first and prove I deserve it second? I want you to cooperate." Elijah looked past them down the aisle. 22 pairs of eyes in first class, 22 people who'd heard every word, not one of them looking at him, not one of them looking away either, all of them doing the same small, careful thing, pretending this was happening to someone else, somewhere else, a long time ago. "I'll move," he said finally, "but I want your names, both of you, written down, and I want the captain to know I was moved without a scan." Trevor's jaw worked. "Sir, that's not necessary. It's necessary to me." Renata tore a corner from her notepad, wrote 2 names in ballpoint, and handed it over without meeting his eyes. Elijah folded it once and slid it into the pocket where his boarding pass had been. He picked up his bag and walked the length of the aircraft, past the curtain, past rows of people who stopped talking when he appeared, and resumed once he'd passed, and sat down in 31B, a middle seat near the rear lavatory. He didn't look angry. That was what passengers would remember later, when reporters came asking. He looked like a man who had just finished one thing and was about to start another. The captain's voice came over the speakers, introducing himself as Daniel Ostrowski. No, Captain Diane Ostrowski, thanking everyone for their patience. Elijah filed the name away beside the two already folded in his pocket. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Somewhere up front, Renata was pouring champagne for the silver-haired man. In 31B, Elijah reached into his bag, took out a phone, and held it in his palm without turning it on. He'd make the call once they started rolling toward the runway. 4 hours to Atlanta. He didn't need 4. He didn't even need 1. As the aircraft rolled slowly along the taxiway, third in a line of 5 waiting their turn, he unzipped the bag and dialed a number from memory, the way a man dials a combination he's owned for 20 years. The line connected on the first ring. Miriam, ground the flight. On the other end, Miriam Delgado was already standing in Elijah's office on the 30th floor of a building in downtown Denver. She'd been briefed enough times over the years to know that when he called from an airplane, something had gone wrong. She didn't ask which flight. She asked one word. Legally? Yes, but slow. And call the morning news desk. 40 minutes. Understood. The line went dead. Elijah looked out the small oval window at the tail of the aircraft ahead of them, the runway lights blinking their steady rhythm through the afternoon haze. He closed his eyes and counted. He got to 71 before the plane stopped moving entirely. At first, nobody noticed. Delays on the taxiway were a fact of life. Then the captain's voice returned, a small crack now visible in the middle of the word, apologize. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief hold from ground control. We'll have more information shortly. 5 minutes passed, then 15, then 25. In the forward galley, Trevor spoke quietly to Renata. They're saying a private jet is on the active runway. It won't move. Mechanical? They don't know yet. Towers holding every departure out of the terminal. A passenger in 29F pulled up a flight tracker app on his phone. There's a private jet on the runway, he said to no one in particular. Been sitting there for 18 minutes. Big one. Corporate aircraft out of Denver. Word moved through the cabin the way smoke moves through a room. In the galley, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Ostrowski stepped out, tall, with silver at her temples, the easy authority of someone who'd landed in bad weather more times than she could count. She didn't look easy now. Tower says the jet's crew is refusing to taxi off, she said, claiming a fuel line issue. Maintenance is en route, but the airport ops manager just called me directly. The aircraft belongs to Ashcroft Holdings. Renata blinked. Ashcroft? As in, the parent company, Trevor said slowly. Of what? Ostrowski looked at him. She'd flown for this airline 19 years. She knew exactly what Ashcroft was, because it was on the paycheck that hit her account on the 15th and the 30th every month. The people who own us, she said. That Ashcroft. The color drained out of Renata's face slowly, the way water drains from a sink. She remembered the corner of notepad paper she'd torn off and written her name on, and the man in the gray sweater who'd folded it once and slid it into his pocket without reading it. Captain, she said, there was an incident earlier during boarding. What kind of incident? A passenger was relocated from first class. Routine. Did you scan the boarding pass? Silence. Show me the manifest. The captain pulled up the passenger list, scrolled to seat 2A, and clicked through to the corporate booking record attached to the name. The screen changed color at the top, a thin gold band appearing along the header, the kind of marking the airline's internal system reserved for a very small category of travelers. Owner Tier 1, Ashcroft Holdings. Ostrowski set the tablet down very carefully. Where is he now? 31B, Trevor said. You moved the owner of our parent company to a middle seat in row 31. We didn't know, Trevor said. You didn't ask. Ostrowski stepped back into the cockpit, and moments later her voice returned over the speakers, the crack now a visible fault line. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be returning to the gate momentarily. We'll have further information once we're parked. At the gate, ground crew and 3 men in dark suits were already waiting, along with a woman with a clipboard and an executive in a navy blazer, Miriam Delgado, Vice President of Operations, who'd been briefed 3 times in the last 40 minutes and knew her career now depended on the next 15. The aircraft docked. The jet bridge extended. Miriam walked the length of the cabin alone, past first class, past row 10, past row 20, and stopped at row 31. Mr. Cross, she said, her voice steady. My name is Miriam Delgado, Vice President of Operations. On behalf of this company and everyone who works for it, I am deeply sorry for what happened to you today. I would like to escort you off the aircraft first and speak with you directly about what comes next. Elijah looked up at her. 30 rows ahead, Renata stood frozen with a folded hot towel still in her hand. The silver-haired man in 3A had put down his newspaper. I'll come with you, Elijah said. but I'm not leaving until every passenger on this aircraft hears what happened." "I expected nothing less, sir." Elijah walked down the aisle beside Miriam, unhurried, the way he'd walked onto the aircraft 4 hours earlier, in the same sweater, carrying the same bag. The only thing different was the distance between those two walks. He stopped at the cockpit. Captain Ostrovsky stood in the doorway, cap in her hands. "Mr. Cross, on behalf of my crew in this aircraft, I owe you a direct apology. What happened was a failure of procedure and a failure of judgment, and it happened under my command." "Did you know?" Elijah asked. "No, sir. Not until the tablet." "Would it have mattered if I were nobody?" Ostrovsky didn't answer right away. "It should have, sir, and it wouldn't have. That's the answer I have to live with." Elijah nodded once. He turned to face the cabin and raised his voice just enough to carry from row 1 to row 40. "My name is Elijah Cross. 4 hours ago, I boarded this aircraft with a valid ticket for seat 2A. I was removed without a scan, without verification, and without a reason that had anything to do with my boarding pass. I was moved because of what I was wearing and what I was carrying. Every one of you saw it happen. Not one of you spoke. The cabin didn't breathe. I'm not telling you this to shame you," he continued. "I'm telling you because in a few minutes, a reporter is going to call this airline for comment, a call I arranged before this aircraft ever pushed back. Next time, it won't be me sitting in row 31. It'll be someone who can't make a phone call, and nobody will ever hear about it." He turned back to Miriam. "I'm ready." At the gate, Miriam addressed the waiting executives directly. "The 2 crew members involved are suspended pending investigation, effective immediately. The captain remains on duty for debrief, then administrative review. Corporate communications and legal have been briefed. The CEO is expecting Mr. Cross's call at his convenience." Elijah handed her the folded corner of notepad paper. "Their names. They wrote them themselves. I'd like them in the report. What else do you want from us?" Elijah thought of the woman 2 rows back who'd moved her purse without being asked, the man who'd looked away, the businessman who'd demanded compensation for a delay he'd caused himself. "Refund every ticket on this flight. Not a voucher, a refund. Rebook everyone on the next available aircraft. First class open to anyone in economy who wants it. Anyone who'd rather not fly today, put them in a hotel on Ashcroft's dime. And training. Every cabin crew member, not a video, a classroom, led by someone who's actually been on the other side of this. I'll send you the name." "Done," Miriam said without hesitation. Elijah picked up his bag. He was tired now, in a way that had nothing to do with the flight. He thought briefly of his meeting in Atlanta, then of the quiet apartment he'd go home to instead, and let it settle without rearranging his face. He glanced once more down the jet bridge. Renata stood just inside the aircraft door, hands folded, eyes finally lifted to meet his. He didn't smile. He didn't glare. He looked at her for the length of one breath, the same look he'd given her in the galley hours earlier, and turned away. That's the story of Flight 2249. Elijah Cross didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. He simply refused to let quiet compliance be the end of the story, and made sure an entire industry had to look at what it had almost let slide by, unnoticed. At 35,000 feet, everyone wears the same seatbelt. But real power was never about what you can take from someone who can't fight back. It's what you choose to do when nobody's forcing your hand. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's always another flight, and always someone worth a second look before you decide where they belong.